Greetings, Anonymous Party members. Greetings also to those of you who are considering joining the movement. To all of you, I bid you a happy 4th of July. Or, better yet, a happy Independence Day. For those of you watching me for the first time, my name is Nick Borden, and this video is part of a series of videos in my campaign for the office of President of the United States. If you're unfamiliar with the whole of what I am doing, I recommend watching at least one of my introduction videos, which are available on the party website, www.anonymousparty.org. This video is to celebrate the signing of what may be the very most important document in the history of our nation, the Declaration of Independence. My family made a tradition in recent years, and this tradition is, at least for me, the highlight of our 4th of July celebration. Before the fireworks, before the celebrating gets into full swing, I read aloud the Declaration of Independence that set into motion what was to become, at least for a short time, the freest nation on earth, and some may even argue, also the greatest. I would like to encourage you all to adopt the same tradition. By hearing or reading these words, we can remind ourselves of what our founding fathers were standing up against. We can remind ourselves what they wanted to protect, what they wanted to have the liberty to do. These men had a lot of collective wisdom. They may not have known everything, nor have been righteous in every conceivable area of their lives, but they were men who understood oppression. They understood tyranny and corruption, and they understood what it does to people who are forced to live under it. And so, I will read the entire Declaration, and then I will offer somewhat of an explanation, some context, to help you possibly understand it better. Some of you may not need it, some of you may even know it as well or possibly even better than I do. But for those of you who don't know it, I really hope it strikes a chord with you and resonates, bringing to light all that your current government is doing that flies in the face of all that 56 great men opposed when they signed this document, the Declaration of Independence. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume, among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing, with manly firmness, his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining, in the meantime, exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without, and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices, and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies, without consent of our legislators. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislators, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is as undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress, in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed, 56 men, to whom we owe a debt of eternal gratitude. Now, some of you may have at some point in your lives written or received a letter with the same basic structure as this declaration. It's not a fun letter to write, and probably even a less pleasing letter to receive. But when one needs to be written, it really should be done just as this one was. Think of the Declaration as the most epic breakup letter of all time. The structure is perfect. The first paragraph basically states, "I've been thinking about us, we don't really seem to be headed in the same direction, and so I think it's time that we should go our separate ways. The second paragraph states what the writers feel about life and the purposes of the ties that have been binding them to the recipient of the letter, and goes on to essentially make the somewhat cliche statement, "It's not me, it's you." But I think it's only fair to tell you why I am leaving you, and so here is a list of reasons, so that if you should decide to change, you can at least avoid making the same mistakes in the future. It then goes on to list those reasons. This particular breakup letter has a very long list, which would, if it were actually a regular relationship breakup letter, a list that long would probably really hurt your feelings if you were the recipient, but immediately following that, it also points out the fact that all these issues were brought to your attention before the breakup happened, and you never did anything. And then the last line of the paragraph following the list of reasons essentially calls the recipient undeserving of the position they once held that bonded them to the writer of the letter. The next paragraph goes on to illustrate how it was not just brought up once, but repeatedly and constantly dismissed, demonstrating a refusal to change in order to secure a firm and desirable bond between writer and recipient. It's not a one-time occurrence. It's not a list of, well, you did this once, you did that once, you did this once, you did that once. It's an ongoing thing. It was brought to your attention, and you're still doing the same stuff. You're not even apologizing. You're not sorry. And lastly, there's a reiteration of the severing of the bond, and a promise that, at least as some may put it, we are never ever getting back together. I think it may be even more important to note that these 56 men firmly believed that what they were doing would not be taken lightly. They had to have known that war would come, that the king wouldn't just give a disappointed sigh, wipe a tear from his eye, and let them go. They knew he was a tyrant. They knew he would want their heads, and he even got a few. These were brave men who did what they knew was right regardless of what they thought the consequences might be. But let's take a closer look at a few of the complaints that they had against the king, and how they may relate to what is going on today. Clearly, not all of the problems that they complained about are still problems today. In fact, some of the problems we've gone the complete opposite direction on, but and obviously they don't mention all the problems that we have today. But I'll just address them in the order in which they appear. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. What this is stating is that he's forcing their governing bodies to assemble places that's very inconvenient. They're having to travel quite a ways, and it's difficult for them to take that much of their public records with them, so they take what they think they need, and then they don't have what they actually need, because, kind of like many government institutions today, they kind of give you the runaround. But travel abilities of today don't make this quite as much of an issue for legislative bodies, or even most situations, but there are still some. But what's definitely relatable is that essentially the king was giving the local politicians the runaround, making it so that they could not accomplish anything for their people, or even themselves, unless they swore allegiance to him. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, try getting something done at the BMV. That's essentially what was going on. And anything basic that you get done at the BMV, and I can't really complain too badly about the BMV because my local one really isn't all that bad. I think the longest I've waited in there was about 15 minutes, which most of you would probably be astounded by that figure. But I do live in a smaller community, and well, we just don't get those kind of lines because there's not that many people. But I know how it is. I have lived in a bigger city, nothing with multi-million people or anything, but big enough to where I've had to wait in line at a BMV. But regardless, that kind of government thing, the runaround. I suppose the IRS would actually probably be an even better example right now with the runaround that they were giving to some of the Tea Party groups, which you may or may not agree with the Tea Party, but what they were doing to the Tea Party should be something that appalls you regardless of whether or not you agree with what the Tea Party wants to do. It's government harassing the people. But moving on, next line, he has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. Again, not an exact match for anything going on today, but the principle is still the same. The king corrupted the justice system in a way that justice is largely an illusion, especially in any area that interfere with what he, the king, or today, the government, wants to happen. If they can in any way politicize or use to their advantage whatever court case is going on, justice doesn't have to happen. They'll get involved and they will cause all sorts of problems. It happens way too much. Moving on. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. The language is a little old in this one, but he created a whole lot of new positions, a whole lot more government people, and he has sent here tons of these new government officials to harass our people and eat out their substance. That's to overly tax them. All these new positions are people that need to be paid, and their pay comes from the people that they're essentially harassing. The point of these people, or these offices that were being appointed, had very little, if anything, to do with the benefit of the people who they were being appointed over. It was just so that the king could exert more control over the people. The same thing's going on in the United States. The size of this government imposes far too much control and costs so much that the people under it are suffering financially. This is probably one of the best matches in all of their reasons for what we're facing today. There's a few more that are very good, but this is certainly one of the best. I could probably go on for half an hour, 45 minutes on all my complaints on that particular issue, but I don't want this video to be that long, so I'll just move on. For protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. Their complaint, in this case, was in regards to military troops being stationed in their towns, which was addressed in the complaint immediately prior to that one. But their complaint was on these military troops not being punished for their crimes committed and for only pretending to pursue justice against them. They were basically staging trials to make it look like, oh, well, we're trying to figure out what's going on, we'll make it look like we are, when they're really not. They're just putting on a show just to make it look like they're trying to get to the bottom of something, and then nothing ever really happens. Somebody gets told, hey, next time you do that, be more careful not to get caught. That's really all that ever happens. So, today we have similar problems, but instead of with the military, it's mostly with Congress or other government agencies or departments, like the State Department, the IRS, the EPA, or even TSA. All of these have been investigated, but nothing seems to ever come from these investigations. And the few things that you think of when you think of these agencies are some of the scarce few that even actually get investigated. There are far, far more problems with these organizations than what's even investigated. And all too many of the grievances are just outright ignored. There are those who honestly and feverishly attempt to bring about justice, even amongst the politicians in both of the two major parties. But even in these cases where there is someone who appears to be honestly and feverishly attempting to bring justice, some of these, it still appears to have more to do with embarrassing the other party and less to do with actually pursuing justice. The campaign against, say, Lois Lerner, the investigation against Lois Lerner with the IRS thing, I wholeheartedly believe that she has done something wrong. There is just too many suspicious details in this for any sane person to not think, you know what, she's up to something and it's no good, she's involved. I don't have access to the evidence, but apparently nobody does. But I'd have a very hard time believing otherwise. But those who are actually questioning her, those who are grilling her, they seem to be relishing it as an opportunity to embarrass the Democrat Party, to embarrass Obama. And while there's plenty of complaints that can be levied against him, it feels like it has more to do with them getting all excited and happy to get back into the White House next term, and I hope to God it doesn't happen. Not because I want another Democrat in there, certainly not because I want Hillary Clinton. Honest to God, she scares the crap out of me. Possibly even more than Obama. I'm still undecided on that, but I can't really think of a single Republican that I would actually really want in the White House either. There's at least a few that I think would be better than who the Democrats appear to be trying to push in, but I seriously can't say I'd be excited about any of them, which is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. But moving on, I don't want to rant about that, but next line. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. Now, certainly, some tax is not only acceptable, but necessary to provide the things that the government does provide and even should provide, like a military. But this tax should be something that all, or at least dang near all people can agree on, meaning that it should be fairly applied and fairly low. Currently, tax in all its forms, if you actually try to figure out where it's all going, where it's all coming from, like all the various sources, it actually accounts for approximately 40% of the cost of every good or service that you buy. Estimates vary depending on the sources, but the best studies that I've seen, the ones that seem the most comprehensive, place the percentage at 38 and 41% respectively. And if you're wealthy, that percentage is actually likely even higher, unless you live like a Scrooge or, hardly spend anything. But what may be even more problematic, though, is the cost of taxation. Aside from the tax itself, figuring out taxes costs money. The system is so complex, full of so many loopholes, rebates, credits, adjustments, write-offs, and whatever, that just figuring out how much money to pay costs money. Figuring out how to run your business to avoid paying too much tax costs money. The system should be simple enough that anyone who graduated high school, prior to Common Core, should be able to figure out how much is owed in 3 minutes or less. there shouldn't be loopholes, exclusions, or credits. At least not ones that everybody doesn't get. Any exclusions or credits should be applied to everybody exactly equally. And I will address that when I get to my tax policy, but there just shouldn't be any. The tax system should be so simple. The only changes from one year to the next should be the rate. And even that shouldn't change much. Moving on. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. This is a grievance that could easily be levied against the federal governments by the states, or even in some cases against some states by its cities or counties. Bigger government outside of an immediate community level, like the city or at least a county level, too much control outside of there restricts what the smaller communities can do. The more restrictions there are, the less you're able to pursue your happiness, the less you're able to pursue your interests. It just makes life more and more difficult. When you actually step back and look at it, more big government, more federal government control results in less freedom. Moving on. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Now, I mentioned this one pretty much just for the first 7 or 8 words of it. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. The last part, we don't really have to worry about, the inhabitants of our frontiers, which at this time was referring to the Native Americans. Well, it says merciless Indian savages, but clearly that part no longer applies. But the first part, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. All you need to think about here to get what I'm talking about is the Trayvon Martin case from not too long ago. This was not nearly as huge of an issue until the president and Eric Holder got involved. Yes, the media certainly assisted with exciting domestic insurrection here, but this case didn't need to be as big as it was. It should have had a quick and fairly quiet trial without millions of Americans becoming emotionally involved. Whether race was even a factor or not mattered very little outside of establishing a motive. Race shouldn't matter in a crime, other than if it was actual racism. The only time that really should be a factor is in establishing a motive, not in determining how strict of a punishment or whether or not it was illegal. It doesn't really matter. If you kill a person, does it matter if you hated him because he slept with your wife or because his skin color was different? It doesn't matter. Killing a person for anything other than self-defense or in a legitimate war or by accident, not that that's completely excusable, but murder is murder regardless of what your reason is. It doesn't matter if it's racism or not, except for establishing motive. But as you should plainly see, there are plenty of parallels between what our founding fathers complained of and what we face today. Our government has become many of the things that it sought to escape from when we won our independence. How did that happen? Well, 2 things. First, evil men are drawn to power, while honorable men, because they're honorable, they don't want the power. they're only compelled to pursue it when it is absolutely necessary to protect all that is good in their lives. Second, we, the American people, failed to study our own history and to teach our children what our forefathers knew. This is why reading the Declaration of Independence is such a valuable tradition. Your children may not understand much of it, but by giving it a place in your celebration, you're demonstrating its importance. If your children associate the reading of the Declaration with the same day as the fireworks in the sky, they'll see it as a happy memory. It's an association with a good celebration. It may not be their favorite part of the day, but by having it in there, it becomes a tradition, a part of that celebration that will likely never leave them. Now, by demonstrating its importance in such a way, it's the same as praying before as how praying before a meal demonstrates the importance of God in the lives of the people who believe in Him. Children who pray before meals may not understand everything about God right away. In fact, they likely don't. Or some of them possibly even ever. But they will understand very early that it is important, at least to their parents, that it happen, the prayer. And with that, they will at least consider that which you hold important, even if they ultimately reject it. But, as with prayer, reading the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence is a great first step in teaching your children the importance of something that you hopefully believe is great. So please, make this part of your 4th of July celebration, because it is important, just as each of you are important. It was written for you, your fathers, and your children. Don't let it, or the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights be trampled any longer. They are there to enumerate your rights to you, to protect you from your government. Because every government needs to know that without its people, it has no power. The power is in the people, and you are the people.